Hi everyone, this is an episode of the PlaceOS podcast. I'm Sabrina and today I'm here with John and we're going to be interviewing Charlie MacDowall, who is an engagement manager for Monster Lab EMEA. Monster Lab is one of our global delivery partners. We work quite closely, especially on custom enterprise projects. And Charlie has a really strong background in the education sector. She's worked both as a digital consultant for that sector as well as directly for universities. So she really understands both how technology can solve problems and also what those problems specifically are. So today we'll be focusing this podcast on the topic of smart campus and education.
I'm going to ask a general question for you, Charlie. What is a smart campus?
Well, I think that I would probably answer that by starting with what isn't a smart campus.
Yeah.
So I have for like 4 years worked in a university campus, which is a brilliant campus, sort of right in the heart of Newcastle. Obviously, a very big campus, lots of different buildings. But I think probably like most universities, it's very geared towards university, well, not necessarily student experience.
Yeah.
And that kind of, it sort of ignores whole demographics of people.
Yeah.
So obviously students are really important, and the university that I was at had roughly about 35,000 students, so it was massive population. But we also had 3,000 staff members, and when I say staff members, I don't just mean academics. Obviously you have a whole lot of support staff, and those support staff tend to work with businesses, they tend to work with suppliers, they work with clients. And university campuses generally aren't geared up for experiences that kind of go beyond the student. So we would have people that would turn up for meetings. They would have no idea where they were going. They wouldn't be able to get into the meeting room. They wouldn't be able to find the reception, for instance. Then they'd really struggle to get us because we had soft phones that didn't work. So just generally, the experience was really fragmented for us and for our visitors. And actually, even when you look at the students, although they've got really great experience physically, in terms of, sort of student union and really great sports facilities and library and social events, there's not necessarily like a platform or anything that kind of supports that would support, I suppose, social interaction or anything beyond your immediate social circle that you would physically meet, whether it be like on your course, in the varsity or, whatever the case may be. So for me, I think a smart campus is something that leverages digital technology to make all of those experiences for everybody that's on that campus really seamless. But then also in the background, because you have all of that digital technology, you're able to also streamline all of the functions of that campus. So obviously campuses are very large, numerous buildings, lots of different operations, lots of people going in and out, obviously internet connectivity right throughout. There needs to be a way that all of those things can be effectively managed, so that one, you're kind of maximizing your energy performance, because obviously that's a huge thing. University campuses in general have a massive carbon footprint, so obviously they're hugely important in achieving net zero. So from an energy performance perspective, it's really important. But equally from an efficiency perspective, it's really important as well, because also, I mean, we talk about cost savings, obviously, in today's world. Universities, just like everybody else, kind of struggling sometimes with that, with the bottom line. And also with staff shortages, so they need to be able to kind of do more with less. Smart campuses should really enable that.
I think the idea of a campus in general is naturally inefficient because it's sprawl. Like cities are efficient because they go up and you can take less land and you can operate more efficiently. So I think when I think of smart campus, I think of like sort of two pools of features. There's like solving problems, and then there's more maybe aspirational features that are related to social connection and experience, and they intersect, obviously. But there's a lot of problems due to the nature that a campus is indeed a sprawling campus, and even just the there's very few buildings one goes to on a regular basis where you go to different parts of the building each
Yeah.
time. I think that's unique about university campuses too, like different faculties, different buildings, different things you're trying to do. It's like navigating a town
Yeah.
every time you go there.
Yeah, definitely. I know that for us, so obviously all universities do everything differently and they're all set up differently. But a lot of universities now have centralized professional services. So they might have like a building that's their building. But speaking from experience, I didn't spend a great deal of time in that building.
Yeah.
I spent most of my time out in the faculties with the academics, obviously speaking with them, but also sort of outside of the campus or having visitors to the campus as well. So it is a very different way of living and working, I think, to how you would do anywhere else. So like within any given day, I could probably be in 3 or 4 different buildings. I could probably be working from 3 or 4 different places, and probably cutting across lots of different faculties within that, and using lots of different services as well, which are all managed by different people. So yeah, they're really sort of big, complex sites, I suppose, that are really difficult to manage, and often actually being managed by really small teams.
Yeah.
So like estates teams, I mean, the sort of the people who manage experience on campus is now growing, and it's becoming more than just like a building function. But the estates teams in universities are generally pretty small, and right now as well, they're just like everybody else in the industry, that they're struggling with staff shortages. So they're having to do a lot and compete in a more competitive world that they've ever competed in because of everything that that COVID has done, with fewer people. And it's just not possible to do all of that without working smarter. It just isn't.
Yeah. And they're trying to do all that while adapting to the new ways of learning and being competitive and attracting students and employees. And it's a complicated space. You mentioned like the many different stakeholders that get overlooked. Who do you think is the most overlooked?
That's probably a contentious subject. So I would think anything for me, anything that isn't to do with the core function of students,
Yeah.
tends to be overlooked.
Yeah.
And that can go across so it can be staff, for instance. So it can be staff that are in sort of support functions, things like marketing, finance, estates even, like that kind of sort of like support professional services function can be quite overlooked. And then equally kind of like their stakeholders. So like the people that they might interact with at a campus. So it's quite difficult, for instance, to bring but I mean, the thing is, so most people think of universities and they think of students. They forget about the fact that most universities, especially mature universities, have significant income from business relationships, whether that be sort of research or whether it be continuing professional development or whatever the case may be. But depending on the type of university, that can range quite significantly to being, say 5-10% of your income to be like 50% of your income. So it's not insignificant. It is big, and quite often, those people. So it is quite difficult sometimes to interact with a business in a university setting.
Even running as like the university as a landlord. I've worked at a university. I've worked at 2 universities before starting the business, and one of them was very much engaged with enterprise and were landlords to corporate clients. So they just had their R&D at the campus and had a relationship where they would bring in students and do collaboration on research. And that was really like enterprise focused, and the university was had like pathways to careers at these companies. Where the other university I worked at was more historic and was more about the academic sort of everything about the research and the teaching and the sandstone buildings. and didn't really have that much connection to industry.
Yes.
So yeah, it does vary, and it can be a big part of the income, and you have to think of the purpose of the university in a different way. I think that's often hard to define, is the purpose of any given university. Even if you're at a university and you ask the students, the academic staff, the researchers to define what the purpose of their university is, you'll get different answers.
Oh yeah.
And where that's hard for companies like ours or any company providing products and services to organizations that don't have a clear message when it comes to their purpose, is what do we align our value to? Like if we're selling to a corporate workplace, it's very clear what the value they're trying to achieve. It's probably real estate saving. It's probably energy saving. They probably want to limit their real estate footprint and downsize and have better tools to manage that, which ultimately equals lower cost of business. We don't have those same driving factors in some cases with universities, and that's the tricky part.
Yeah. So I think you probably do in some areas. Like I think, and like you say, I think if you spoke to lots of different people, so if you spoke to like the university executive, you'd probably get a very different answer to if you spoke to the estates team, because they have different priorities. But I think within the estates, they do have those really clear messages around, we want to reduce our carbon footprint, we want to reduce operational costs, we want to maximize efficiency. And also as well, I think one of the big things for university is space. Because even though, I mean, obviously the universities vary in size quite wildly, but even for very large universities, and actually usually especially for very large universities, space is such a precious commodity. Because like we were talking about before with the sort of research grants and research income, a lot of those grants come with you need a space, you need somewhere to do some stuff that you've successfully bid for, and that can be it can be creating a center, or it could just be a lab, or it can be quite different, but ultimately there is always a demand for space, and they're always kind of having to juggle the needs of different parts of the business. So I think space actually is probably something which is possibly universal as a problem that you would almost get from anybody that you asked.
And there's a lot of thoughts and people are trying to adapt to what universities mean now post COVID, or maybe in the middle of COVID. And a lot of people just think, just put teaching online. Yeah, sure, that works for large lecture style classes. But there's things like research, for example. You need special facilities. You can't take your nuclear fusion reactor home with you. There's certain things you have to do on campus. And university campuses are, I think, one of the best examples of that. And I'm always trying to give examples, even in workplace, where certain workplace projects you have to do in the office for security reasons. You're not allowed to take those files home, or you're not allowed to access that network from anywhere that hasn't been audited. There's always a reason for a physical campus or workplace or building. I think there's areas that are now open for discussion on what has changed, and certainly the large lectures don't necessarily have to be on campus, and they've been online for a long time, right? When I was at uni, I did a lot of lectures online, and early adopters of online learning, most universities. So now it's like, well, what is the purpose of the campus? And for undergrad students and that stakeholder, and the employees and the professional staff, one of the main roles of the campus is connection and coming together, and those social spaces have more value, or smaller huddle spaces, or somewhere you can collaborate or meet, or have meetings by chance, which can't happen online.
Yes, yeah. And I think this is probably quite an interesting area from a university perspective, because as you kind of mentioned before, you've got some universities which are quite traditional in the way that they are. And because universities are large organizations, they tend to be they're quite tricky to change. So the kind of reaction to COVID is slow, I think, in some areas. And I have heard from numerous universities, we're struggling to get people back to campus.
Mm.
And I'm sort of like, well, yeah, I'm not surprised, because when people have been away, you've stripped out your amenities, you've taken desks away, you've taken away lots of things that made it like a comfortable, convenient place to work. And equally, there's not really been much thought to, as you say, how people now work and why they're coming into the campus as opposed to doing stuff from home. Because one of the good things about universities is that most of them provided people with all the setup that they needed at home. So they've got quite, unless you sort of don't have a dedicated space, which is difficult. But if you've got a dedicated space and you've got your two screens set up and you've got your chair the way you need it to be, and you've got lunch downstairs, then which doesn't cost you anything, then there needs to be like a really good reason to go into campus. And I think that this is an area that universities probably need to do a little bit more work in, and thinking about what is that experience that they can create that actually attracts people in, what is going to sort of cater to the way that people want to work now. So are they coming in to work together? Is it sort of a collaborative space? And how can they change the makeup of that campus to actually accommodate those different ways of working, while making sure people still have access to the things that they need, like the amenities, like catering, all that sort of stuff.
And that's sort of what you do at Monster Lab as well, right? As part of the consulting process, to help people really understand what challenges are they trying to solve, and what can digital technology be, what kind of implementation can be done to help support those processes. So how do you guys actually, how do you work with clients to actually solve those challenges and get something moving?
Yeah, so I think for us, everything, so a lot of people, when they do tech projects, they go tech first, and it's always a mistake. Just because really tech is always, for me anyway, and I think has always been an enabler for whatever it is that you're trying to enable. So if you don't understand that piece, then what are you actually trying to get the tech to do? So what we tend to do is we work with clients to understand who their stakeholders are, and take their sort of stakeholders through a process of discovery, where we really understand not necessarily how they're going to use the technology, but they will understand what their sort of as is processes are, how they currently work, and then how they would like to work, and what's the kind of ideal scenario for them. And then we can kind of work backwards from there in terms of figuring out, so what sort of digital solutions do we need to implement that can support that? So it's all about sort of people first. It's about integrating around sort of human behaviors, and making sure that people are bought into the process. Because I think we all know the scary statistics around digital transformation projects failing, and obviously lack of engagement, lack of adoption. These are all things that are high on the list of why they fail. So we sort of mitigate that by making sure that we understand what people need, and that they are bought into the process. And so that when the technology comes, it's really adding value to what they do. It's enabling them to work the way that they want to work, and therefore they are more likely to adopt the technology and to use it in their day-to-day. So that's kind of our piece.
I think that's important, like not to not miss anything, because you have this the client has an opportunity to fund a project right now, and once that project's done, maybe they can't make any changes for quite some time because the funding has been used up. So getting everything right up front, in my mind, sometimes you sort of have to slow it down a little bit, because a lot of people want to get things moving and rolling it out, and we know what features we want, but they miss opportunities. And I found sometimes in sort of a scoping process, some feedback at that moment from clients is, this is too slow. We're not. We already know all this. You're telling us something we know, and my response then is, we'll just be like, well, we're making sure we're not missing anything, and often we do capture something, and the client is grateful that they went through that process. Do you find sometimes that consulting process, you sort of have to sell the value of that a little bit?
Oh yeah, massively. Like I think quite often people they just don't really understand the value of that process. And like you say, people get really I think normally people who buy technology have a very specific problem that they want to solve. And once they start to see that solution might be there, they get really excited about it and they just want it to happen. And
Yeah.
usually by the time they get to that point, it's probably been a problem for a number of years.
Yeah.
So they don't want to wait. They don't want to slow down. So yeah, it is really difficult to kind of sell the value of that process. But ultimately, if you're going to invest in technology, and technology is expensive, so if you're actually going to invest in a technical solution, then you need to do everything possible to make sure that that doesn't fail and that it's actually used and that it does what you want it to do. So you might have like you might be an estates department in university and you've got a really specific thing that you want that technology to do. Count desks, for example, whatever. But if that's kind of all you focus on and you buy a piece of technology to support you in doing that, you miss all of the other opportunities around it. So you might want to count desks, but what about the people who are kind of adapting to a post-COVID world and hybrid working? Might they want to actually figure out who's going to be in the office and when they're going to be in the office? Might they want to be able to book a space? Might a whole team want to be able to book a neighborhood of desks, for instance? And then when they get there, they can check in to the desks. And then all of a sudden you've got a way of doing what you want to do because you can figure out, well, how many desks you've got and how used they are, but you're also adding value to the people who are using that in the first place. So ultimately your investment has gone further and actually probably you're going to get more out of it. So it's kind of getting people to think beyond their immediate need and looking at what the other opportunities might be to create better experiences for the people who are using that space. And that's, I suppose, the kind of value and the bit that sort of discovery user research can do, as well as obviously making sure that technology is usable, that people like it, that it adds value, and that ultimately the project doesn't fail because people don't like the technology.
Yeah. I think related to that is also like looking at everything from other user profiles, other users that are going to use this technology. Like, how does it relate to them? A lot of people, myself included, sort of sometimes struggle to think about how other people would approach this. Like, you might think the desk scenario. I want to check into a desk with this in this sort of way with a QR code. I love using QR codes. That's how we're going to do it. But nobody else wants to use QR codes. And sometimes just stepping back and looking at how things should work for multiple stakeholder groups is what people miss when they think they have the answer to the problem. Because this has been a problem for so long, they just want to solve it quickly. But sometimes you have to take maybe a step back to see if this is the right way of solving it.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that kind of goes back to your point as well about, there being so many different stakeholders in a university, that your point of view is only ever going to be one point of view. And there's ultimately going to be so many more people who would have a stake in that process that might want something different. And I think that's why taking that opportunity up front to really understand what those needs are is such an important thing in complex organizations, particularly, and especially when you're looking at kind of large estates where any investment in technology is going to be pretty heavy.
Yeah.
And when you're going through that consulting process, I know that really understanding the business outcomes is key and making sure you're aligned to those. What are some of the key business outcomes that universities are chasing? Is it always related to the bottom line, or is there other key topics that are coming up in recent months?
Yeah, so I think that ultimately universities are businesses, and people sometimes forget that. So they need to be profitable organisations, and they need to have healthy bottom lines, and that's always part of what they're looking at. But ultimately, universities serve students, and that's what they're there for. So that's not necessarily just about making sure they get to their lectures on time and they have a quality education. It's also making sure that their experience of the university is good. So that it's an increasingly competitive landscape now in terms of actually getting students, whether it's home students or international students or whatever the case may be. So creating a really great experience is always going to be top of mind for universities. And also I think within that, one thing that has been increasingly important, particularly like through COVID and all the isolation that was suffered and all that sort of stuff, is mental health and well-being, and looking after mental health and well-being for students. It really took a hit in COVID. So quite a lot of universities are mindful of that in everything that they do. And that's really important. And obviously that extends to staff as well, and making sure that staff are looked after and cared for. And of course, obviously, solutions like we're talking about have real benefits to health and well-being for lots of different stakeholders. So that's also really important. I think that, not dissimilar to commercial real estate, net zero is a hugely important thing as well. And like I said before, campuses, especially large campuses, have really big carbon footprints. So being able to effectively manage that, especially in a region like the Northeast, we have 5 universities, relatively large universities in very close proximity. I wouldn't really want to think about what their carbon footprint was combined, but if they all, I mean, I know they all are on a drive to net zero, but if they're all successful in that relatively quickly, that's probably going to have a big collective impact. So yeah, so bottom line is always important, but yes, that there are so many other things that a university needs to be able to deliver.
I think the environmental side, in certain markets and governments are starting to fine buildings that are underperforming, right? So there's mandated energy targets, and if they're not met, you have to pay the consequence. And that's such a driving factor, because you save money if you limit your energy consumption, but you also don't have to pay a fine, or don't have to be presenting your building as an underperforming building as well. So nobody wants to have like a D rating plastered on the door.
No, and I think as well that ultimately the customers of universities really are, for the most part, are students, which is Gen Z, which are very environmentally conscious. So even kind of, if you kind of took away the fines and everything, actually, if you have a really sustainable campus that performs really well and is having minimal negative impact on the environment, or even positive impact on the environment, if you're sort of actually generating energy, for instance, then that's actually really, really, that's a really great differentiator, and a really good way of attracting more students to your university, because they want to be associated with brands who are conscious about their sort of carbon footprint and how they manage that. So it has benefits beyond just, cost saving in terms of, expenditure not being fined. From a reputational standpoint for a university, it's actually a pretty big deal.
Yeah, 100%. I think related to that, like social inclusion as well, another trend that technology can play a part in, right? Because it's related to social connection and how the physical campus can play a part in that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that, so universities in general, obviously, have a sort of civic responsibility, I suppose. And obviously that, their campuses need to be sort of friendly places and be inclusive and welcoming to all sorts of people from all sorts of different walks of life. And that will include any technology that they have on their campus would need to be accessible to anybody, and improve their performance and the way they can experience that site. But kind of, I suppose, on a wider scale as well, a lot of universities are looking at, I suppose, how they can work within their cities to create that kind of experience that is inclusive, rather than not even just on their campus. So that, I suppose, that kind of thing extends way beyond the campus walls as well. And you get quite a lot of universities that have agreements with, whether it be local government or whatever, where they'll do initiatives which are kind of outside of their campus as well, which is also a key thing that they need to focus on.
That's quite interesting, because we've often spoken about university campuses almost like being a small smart city, because you've got so many stakeholder groups, you've got students, there's accommodation, there's retail experiences, there's workplace, there's commercial real estate, sustainability, transport. So it's interesting to hear that that's something I hadn't heard before, that they actually collaborate quite closely with cities. I guess they, like you mentioned, they've got such a large footprint, they probably collectively together take up a large part of the city.
Yeah, massively. So even if you look at obviously let's just take Newcastle as an example because that's where I am. But we have Northumbria University and Newcastle University, who are basically across the road from each other. And then there's also Newcastle City Council, and collectively, they have a lot of real estate, and their energy performance, their carbon output, all that sort of stuff. Collectively, that they can do quite a bit to be able to minimize that and minimize the impact that it can have on the city, which is really important. But also they can make sure that they are working together to sort of implement city initiatives that are that will reduce things like you're saying before, like or increase social inclusion, or try and tackle economic inequalities, or whatever the case may be. So they might have these kind of wide-spanning programs that look to upskill people in deprived areas, for instance. There's all sorts of things that go on from a university that goes sort of way beyond their own campus and their own their own walls, basically.
So I think I'll end with one last question. Are you seeing good examples of a true smart campus today?
Well, I think there are probably examples, but I don't think they're necessarily here in the UK. And I think that actually there's really good examples in the private sector of and I think you can still call them campuses because they're not necessarily an office floor. So there's some really great examples. We just had one open on the quayside in Newcastle. Deloitte opened a new office on the quayside, and they did it's all kind of post-COVID and looking at sort of various different workspaces, for instance, and lots of smart technology integrated into that building as well. And I've seen some really great examples of it in London as well. So yeah, I mean they're there, but I think that currently they're probably quite few and far between.
Yeah.
So I think over the next sort of few years, it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. I think particularly, we've talked about it quite a lot, but sort of post-pandemic and this kind of shifting and continually evolving environment that we're all working in, learning in, living in. It's going to be quite interesting to see how that forces change. It's probably going to be quite uncomfortable, I think, but sort of significant change usually is. So yeah, I think that. So I mean, I suppose the answer is yes. There are good examples out there. I think the ones that I've seen at the minute are mostly private sector. Not necessarily seen lots of universities. Some in other areas which are pretty good. But I'm hoping that in the next few years we'll start to see a lot of evolution around it. And if we have this conversation in another 12 months, then it might be a different answer.
I think so, because I feel like I'm seeing the start of like the true visionary smart campus, but it's just not there yet. It's like people want it and they're starting to define it, and it's just a matter of I think it's one of those examples where technology is there waiting to solve these problems, but the industry, particularly universities, are getting their thinking around this, right? Like repurposing the campus, understanding what their needs are, and then we can bring the technology to that.
Yeah, exactly. And this whole thing about technology being there for universities, not necessarily, a new thing. I think that a lot of technological innovation happens in universities like 50 years before it comes to market. Yeah. So you have these really like innovative people within these universities as well that do try and kind of drive this change. And I know that here we've got big groups in human-computer interaction. There's also big groups in sustainability, and lots of amazing research going on in that area. So, you've got kind of tech providers and tech solutions that are ready to come in, but they've also got like really, really great experts internally that can help them with this stuff.
100%.
Do something which is probably totally out of the box, which isn't necessarily there yet. So I think that a collaborative approach to this is also really important, and kind of being able to draw on that academic expertise, possibly combine it with some of the expertise in the sector about actually getting things to market and making it happen quickly, that kind of stuff could be really transformative. So I think that the existing technology is great and there's lots that it can do. But for me, with universities, I'm really excited about what else they might be able to bring to that if they draw on some of the expertise they might have in their academic base, because that is so unique and it doesn't really exist anywhere else.
Yeah, and that's exactly such a unique opportunity to bring in world leading experts on the leading edge of technology into the technology that runs their campus.
Exactly. And they're already on the payroll. Brilliant.
Yeah. Okay, cool. I think we'll leave it there, Charlie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.